In this lesson, we're going to talk about pre and post SQL statements. So in many cases, it's very useful to be able to run pre-SQL and post-SQL statements, like before and after, some ETL process runs. So for instance, in our example where we're loading the transactions table, where I have a sales file as a text file, and I'm loading it into a table over here in SQL Server. Sometimes it might be useful to clear out that table via a truncate table statement, because that might be much faster. So up here on our action property, we currently have it set to clear then insert. So what that will do is go out and run a delete statement in the database and say delete star from, or delete from this table across the board, and it'll just clear the whole table out. But if you have millions upon millions of rows in that table, that delete statement could take a long time. So it might be much faster to do a truncate statement instead. So the way that we handle that is down here in the properties of almost every single database object in the system, we have pre-DML and post-DML properties, where basically I can write any SQL statement that will run prior to the job, the ETL process running, and post the ETL process running. So say, for instance, I want to truncate this table before this process runs. I would just simply come into here and say truncate table and truncate my table. Okay. Then I can come up here and say, you know what, this doesn't need to be clear than insert anymore. I can just make this an insert only, because the clearing out of the table is going to happen here in the pre-DML. And then let's say I want to do some post-DML. So after the table is loaded, let's say, for instance, I'm not loading every single field in the table. If you look at my table over here in SQL Server, I actually have one additional column in here that I'm not loading in my process. So I have my calendar, item store, dollars and units being loaded, but I don't have the sell price. Okay, so that's not coming into the system. So I could do one of two things. I could either do that in my ETL process. I could add the column here and then calculate that value during the ETL process, or I can do a post-DML and I can update that table after the process runs. So there's a couple of different ways to handle different situations depending on what you want to do. So let's say, for instance, I want to update that table, and I want to take my SQL statement here and I want to put it in the post DML property. And basically what I'm doing here is I'm saying update the transaction table, set the sell price equal to the sold dollars divided by the sold units. So I'm calculating the sell price after the fact, after the table gets loaded. Now I can do the same exact thing in here during the ETL process, but for the purposes of demonstration, we're doing it over here in the post-DML. So if I go ahead and I save this and I run it, I'm going to go ahead and compile it now. And then I go ahead and rerun it. There's my parameter that we had set up before. Okay, this should just take a second to run. And then what we'll do is we'll go in and look at the log to see what happened. Okay, so now if I go look at the log, I got a little bit more information here. Here's my truncate. So it says I'm running the pre-DML statement. There's my truncate, and it says successful completion. So the table was cleared out prior to the ETL process. And then after the process finished, it says running post-DML, and it updates, runs that update statement, and it tells me that rows affected were 16,649, which is the same number of records that we loaded. So that's how you use the pre and post SQL statements on the database objects, which can be very useful.